everyone. I'm very excited to introduce to you our next speaker. It's Mr. Kelly Latimore. I don't know if you've had a chance to visit his table in the back yet. It's on the left. If so, you will have seen his incredible artwork. A St. Louis local, Kelly started painting icons in 2010 while a member of the Common Friars, a small monastic farming community in Athens, Ohio. His icons mix a classic orthodox style with figures representing the marginalized and oppressed, as well as unexpected present-day saints. One of his icons, which depicts the flight of Egypt as Latinx immigrants crossing the desert. It adorns the cover of Pope Francis's book, A Stranger and You Welcomed Me. Kelly will challenge us to bring about more engagement, conversation, and communion with each other and our surrounding communities using the art around us. Please give us a warm welcome to Kelly Latimore.
Well, good morning on a beautiful St. Louis fall day. Thank God. It's been so hot here lately for those who haven't been around. My name is Kelly Latimore. Been in St. Louis now for about 7 years, originally from the Chicagoland area. Today, I can't believe just everything that Marianne said. Please give her another round of applause because it was very engaging and I think hit home to a lot of the things that I'm hoping to talk about today, specifically with artwork. That being said, I am an artist, and I think what really being an artist is about learning how to be human and be more present. And a lot of that involves looking and seeing and trying to be more aware. I fail at it all of the time, don't we all? But art is about communication and trying to communicate something. And me as a little kid, I actually really struggled with words, so this kind of scares me a little bit still. But the way that I communicated was through art and music and poetry and trying to find words, even if that was hard. And so with Marianne's influence, I actually wanted to start talking about art in communion, art in community, art in conversation by starting out with just a few questions that we could talk with each other about at our tables. And just to really get this all going and to get our minds thinking about it. And these are the conversations, and you don't have to do them in any order, but maybe go through and we'll spend maybe 5 to 8 minutes talking about these questions. And then I'd like to, as you're hearing each other talk about it, think about the words that you're hearing from one another, or maybe phrases that are you hear them other people saying at your table, and just be present to what's being said, and then we'll come back to it. These are the questions. For you, what is the purpose of art in our communities and churches? Do you feel represented in the artwork in most churches? And what is a piece of artwork that has truly moved you? Okay? So let's take about 5 to 10 minutes and go ahead and we'll come back, okay?
And I agree, art doing so many things. Maybe it just brings people together who are attracted to space art. And just look at space things. Right. And but it also takes conversation. There's art very, very and not just musical art, all kinds of expression.
All right, maybe just finish up a last thought for anyone who's talking. And okay, what are some of the words or phrases or things that really popped up in some of those conversations that you just heard other people saying? We can shout them out too if we can all hear. But beauty.
Oh, I have a mic.
Spiritual. Okay. Preaching. Inspiration. Awesome. Elevating. Perspective. It's a good one. Transformation. Communion, yeah. Inclusion. Say that again. Highlighting. These are all really good. Yeah. Contemplation. Any more?
Diversity.
Diversity.
I have the mic.
Oh, yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. The main question that I want to just for us to focus on today, really, and it seems like a really simple question, but I've come to find out in doing this work that it's actually quite loaded, and that is, what is church art for? What is the art in our churches for? What is the art that's in our community spaces for? Seems very simple. Is it glorified wallpaper, or can it actually be doing something to bring us closer together and to create more connection, as Marianne was talking about, and more genuine conversation? So I want to just pose that question to start. But for me, I got my start painting icons in community. I started at a small farming community of men and women. We had couples, single priests, teachers, professors, all living together, and our main mission was working on a food pantry farm. I did this after college, and while there I met Father Tom. I'd always been doing landscapes and portraits and been doing art my whole life. But during this time, Father Tom said, have you ever tried icons, painting icons? And I hadn't. But being in Ohio University, it was in Athens, Ohio, there's a huge library. I went down and I got a bunch of books and just poured over these images. And I just started doing what all artists do, but iconographers specifically, is I just started tracing. I just started tracing over the old lines and looking at images and trying my hand at it, until I got to a point where I tried a version of my first icon, which was called Christ Consider the Lilies. Let me skip ahead a little bit, one more. Now, it's a good first try. This is my first try. The lines are shaky. As one of my Franciscan friends likes to say, like, Jesus almost looks surprised that the lilies are in his hands a little bit. which is true. But really, I was learning how to become a better painter, still am. But what was really kind, though, of my fellow community members is that they embraced this image because it was a part of our common life and experience. So therefore, it had become a new gift, even if it wasn't a great first try. It was saying something about who we wanted to be and how we wanted to see the world and the community around us, and to be in right relationship with the earth as we were farming and growing food for the homeless poor. And so really, it showed me that art can truly be a placeholder. Art can be a placeholder for our community's thought, prayer, but most importantly, our action, right? And so this really gets it into the exactly what someone said, which art as communion. Communion really being something is concepts of fellowship, partnership, but this idea of to share jointly or to collectively communing with something. We often think about this, obviously, with communication. It's through the word conversation. But how do we do this in terms of communing with art? And so now as time has gone on, and I really kind of randomly found myself in this work. I had a few people at our local community commissioning pieces, and could you paint St. Michael for my nephew named Michael? I was like, oh, okay, I'll try that. And then a few other things, and it just kind of carried on. But now, 13 years since I started, I have found myself, along with many other artists who are doing similar work, actively being engaged in conversations within the church about art, and specifically about how we use the art in our worship, but also in our spaces. And that is not somewhere that I expected to be. And so I come here today wanting to share some of these stories, some of the images that I've done myself in collaboration with my partner, Evie, but also with these other communities that I've had the pleasure of knowing, entering into this thing that all art can potentially do, but the art in our churches and communities can also do as well, as create more conversation and more dialogue. And so one of the first, just really basic, icon, for those who don't know, iconography for the Eastern Church was kind of the main place that it landed for its sacred images. For the Western Church, even after iconoclasm, which is like breaking images and all these other movements, found other versions of it, but had to do with more stained glass and other things. But the early church, for some people, they were illiterate. The only way that they actually knew it was going, or they didn't speak the language of Latin or what have you. The only way that they knew to kind of know what was going on was the work, the artwork. And so for the iconographer, or image writer, the task was to really be taking a saint or an image of Christ or angels, what have you, and really writing them. Another term for iconographer I've heard, which I like in the Greek, is a depictor of life, which is basically a painter, And the church engrafted that language into its life together. But it's really trying to be aware enough that you're taking a saint or Christ, and the icon is seen as a window to God, or a window into the life that a saint lived, fighting against injustice, living compassionately, and dedicating their life to Christ. But now, as we moved in America, something happened. All of this artwork over the last years, and a lot of it has to do with next man, Warner Solomon. And you might recognize this painting. It's called The Head of Christ. It also became known as the Protestant icon. And I'm a PK. I'm a pastor's kid. From a small evangelical tradition. And the only artwork we had in our churches was all by this man. And it was this one, which was creepily in the men's bathroom. This one of Christ knocking on the door, which even weirder, was right above the changing table in the nursery. And then another version of the Head of Christ, which was in our sanctuary. Well, what's happened is in America, I've talked to so many people that this was the only image, the 70 kind of yearbook photo of Jesus. That's the only only image they had of Christ growing up. And that's a problem. What's happened in America is that we've locked Jesus into one image, one white, blonde-haired, blue-eyed man. And growing up, I didn't think anything of it until I had conversations. I'd entered into this holy pondering, I like to call all of it, of people who were not white and who were marginalized and whose experience had nothing to do with the white American version of that. And that changed me. And it continues to. So, and this has been a kind of a huge part of the conversations that I've been lucky enough, and I say lucky enough because my favorite part about iconography is it is a very communal art, being able to enter into these conversations. And it's been about this, the first part of it is about representation and diversity in their images, right? And so really my kind of first entrance into this and start was working with communities in about representation and going back to the images that we've known, these metaphors, that these sacred images that we have in iconography or stained glass or in our place of worship, it's about taking symbols and metaphors in the meeting and putting them together in such a proper way where they're beautiful, but we also connect to them, right? And so I'm going to show you a few of these kind of early images where I was trying to wrestle with these communities and kind of creating new images. So the Good Shepherd, more of a traditional one on the left. The one on the right was a community, was a farming community, but really trying to engage that the farmers of Jesus' time, the shepherds, were definitely not white. And as a Jesus that is not a king or lording over us, but the image of a shepherd is actually really beautiful. The shepherds during that time would sometimes be out in the desert for weeks with their flock, and the only way they would actually sometimes even have water was drinking the milk of the ewes in their flock. That was the only way they had to, sustain themselves. It's a depiction of a shepherd that is not lording over us or but is actually wanting to commune with us and be in the wilderness with us. And so again, the problem is if Jesus is white and God is white, then potentially all authority is white. So then how does that make the people of color view the personhood of Jesus? And then how does that make people who are white treat people of color? But again, also diversifying it in a different way, showing this is called the Good Shepherdess, commissioned by a woman who became a priest in the Episcopal Church, and then her daughter then became a priest in the Episcopal Church. That in Shetland, Scotland, it was a tradition that the women typically would take care of the sheep. So again, the Good Shepherd, but making it as Christ as a woman or a woman figure, exploring the divine feminine. One of the more traditional icons that you've probably all seen is the Trinity. It's by Andrei Rublev. The community that commissioned the one on the right in New York City really wanted to explore the idea of the divine feminine, Christ calling himself a mother hen. So instead of the angels being potentially men, which was from the story of Abraham entertaining the three angels, or the three men, the visitors, three women of color around a table, and the colors they're wearing also connecting to the LGBTAI community, that people could kind of see themselves in this image. Grapes and wheat, where the cup would usually be symbolizing to this community I worked with that they still had work to do in understanding and seeing God in their midst. This is the Transfiguration, more traditional one to the left. The one on the right is at St. Luke's Episcopal Church in Salisbury, North Carolina. And they were also having these conversations that every single piece of stained glass and artwork in their sanctuary was all of white saints and angels. And there was a black woman and an elderly woman who she grew up predominantly in an all-white parish. And for the first 25 years of her life, she thought that black people couldn't go to heaven because the only things that she saw were white angels and saints. It was very problematic. So this was an attempt to take Christ and make him a man of color, as he was. But in this instance, what the conversation that was really interesting is not depicting Jesus as whiteness and using white paint, but as brightness and using silver leaf. And this image ended up being a gift in terms of, as you kind of move around the sanctuary, just seeing the light shift and change. It's something you can't hold, but reflects and has already been reflecting all around you. St. Joseph with baby Jesus. My partner and I like to say, I have a whole collection on my phone of ugly medieval babies. You guys have seen this, it's like a thing. My partner Evie is like, if you're gonna paint this, you have to paint baby Jesus cute. So and we have a priest who purchased this icon, and he says every time he sees it on the wall, he likes to go up to it and just like, oh, too cute. Like, yeah, which is an honor. But this idea that Joseph, I think, is the family that commissioned this was white, and they just commissioned an image of Saint Joseph with baby Jesus, and I painted Joseph as a man of color, baby Jesus, and when they got that icon and saw it for the first time, their kids were like, "Wait, why is Jesus black?" And it created a conversation, though, that she said she could have never had, and she said it was the most beautiful conversation that she was able to have with her kids. And she realized just like the way that she had also locked Jesus into this image of herself and what that was saying to her children. But that Joseph really symbolizes that the seeds of love can really enact themselves in the most ordinary things in life. And this icon was painted during the pandemic, and I was just thinking about all these people who are facing eviction. Here in St. Louis is a huge thing. Trying to put food on their tables and just doing all these tiny little things to just take care of people. I mean, I'm sure all of you experience versions of that in your own communities. And St. Joseph really represents that for me. Here's a funny one. The image on the left, this is called Christ Emmanuel. This is it's trying to depict Jesus as a young man when he's in the temple teaching. But the metaphors, the old metaphors that they had, or that the artist thought that they could come up with, is just giving Jesus a giant forehead. Like, he's wise, look. It's odd, you know. But the image on the right came about from meeting, and I've just been thinking about everybody in the Middle East right now, Israeli and Palestinian. Just war is awful. And thinking about this is actually one of the young men that I met in a small village, Palestinian kid, and he's just, the people of this village were nonviolent, and they were against all forms of violence, and had the kids in the village had organized a nonviolent peace march that some extremists had blocked their route to school, which was 4 miles. Instead, these kids had to walk 11 miles to and back from school every day, and they said, this sucks, obviously. And they're like, and so they organized, the kids of the village organized a small, non-peaceful march that we got to be involved with, and it was one of the most powerful things. And that's the embodiment of Christ, like breaking the chains and breaking a rifle over his knee and being nonviolent. Just a few more. This is the prodigal son. This is, I think, a lot of people's favorite stories. My mom really loves this story too. My mother suffered with mental illness for a long time, and she always felt like a prodigal daughter in a sense. But we were talking about this, and she was saying how in so many images it just looks like the father's not that excited. But again, kind of renaming it, having kind of being overwhelmed with love and joy at the return. Excuse me. And having I don't know if you can see the jealous brother in the little hut at the very top, if you can barely see that. This one's really interesting. This is in the middle image. The Madonna scroll is in the Field Museum in Chicago, and it's painted on silk. And it's only been unrolled, I think, 2 times in the last 25 years, just for a picture, and then rolled back up. So it's not on public display. What's really interesting about it, though, in the research, is painted in the 17th century in China by an artist. But and this image is now at the Synod right now. But the Salus Popolani Romani, which is think was painted in the fourth century, that somehow the artist in China saw that image and copied it, but instead, the way that he wanted to communicate to the sacredness around was what he saw around him, which was Mary and baby Jesus as Chinese, which I thought was beautiful. So not only entering into a conversation with each other, but also entering into a conversation as the artist into the past, but carrying all those metaphors and making them new. And this is kind of my version, trying to do the silk, but also changing a few things and having baby Jesus hold Mary's hand tenderly. One of my more recent works, this is the parable of the mustard seed. And so I'm a huge bird watcher, and someone after I released this was looking through the verses of the Bible, and it's like Jesus was definitely a birder. Like, he talks about birds kind of a lot, which I thought was a really good observation. But this idea with this image, a lot of the images I've seen is kind of, there's like 3 birds. It's not very diverse. In like a little tree, but having like the mustard plant and how it most likely was, which is black mustard there in Israel. And these are all native birds to Israel-Palestine area, and most likely Jesus would have seen, which when I saw the different colors and variety, it was just like so beautiful to think about. And just from that during that time, for when Jesus would have told this story, they would have known that no one would intentionally, they would have thought it was a weird story, because that no one would intentionally plant a mustard shrub. And in fact, in the Jewish Mishnah, forbade the growing of mustard seeds in the garden because they were useless, annoying weeds. And in the Hebrew scriptures, the birds of the air can be a reference to Gentiles and non-Jews, or the foreigner. So the parable really suggests that the kingdom of heaven is available to everyone, even those who may not be considered, or maybe even for those who may be considered outsiders or not worthy, right? That Jesus is calling us to see the significance and insignificant. And a foreigner and the stranger, and welcoming the foreigner and the stranger and the outcast. And these are the kind of communities that will look like unwanted weeds to the world, or even to other Christians. However, this may be exactly the church that Jesus is asking us to embody. This really gets into now talking about the saints. Another part of my work was really trying to work with communities and understanding the saints and modern saints, and with so many saints not being canonized, and entering into that conversation, and it's been very interesting. And again, I'm not a historian, but from what I understand, for the first 1,000 years of the church, saints were chosen by our local communities, and it was really about someone that you knew. It was, Joanne, she's down the road, she's feeding the family of 10 next to her. What a beautiful person, enacting the love of Christ. Or, John fixing his brother's house for free with stones from his own house. All these things, and they became saints. Sometimes they're indicated with the square halos. Sometimes those were donors, but other people that the community loved. Well, after about 1,000 years, the Pope came around and said, actually, this is going to be my job. But what that did, and what's sad about it, is that it no longer became the people that you knew. And so even though the saints that were chosen during that time, a lot of them from Italy, and rightly so, they lived beautiful lives and saintly lives, but it wasn't people that you knew. And so what I think what's interesting about that history, and for your communities, is that who are the people among us here and now who are living lives fighting against injustice, and trying to put images of them in front of us, again, to remind us, to help us to see the world just as they did in new ways, and seeing injustice around us. Some communities have decided that a portrait of a person is particular. Some communities have decided, no, like, we believe, even though the church at large does not believe this, we believe this person is a saint. They're showing us something about God. And I think that's, as we're here today, I'd love to have more of those conversations about who those people are to you, and how you can put those images of them in front of your community as a way to lead you forward in living the lives that you want to be, in the way you want to be. And so for me, it's been encountering more modern people. This is called the Saints of Selma, commissioned by a woman whose uncle marched across the Edmund Pettus Bridge. And I think that's something about this has to do with miracles. And I think for so much with the church, and is that we kind of have miracles up in here, up in the clouds. I think it's a miracle that John Lewis, who's right here with a little backpack, marched over the Edmund Pettus Bridge, got beat over the head, and then came back the next day. That's a miracle. Or St. Francis, this conversion that he has, that he took such compassion on the leper that it just changed his whole life. Like, that's a miracle. It's a bigger topic, but I think the church needs to have a bigger conversation about what miracles are. That's not some thing in the sky, but something that's really grounded. Dorothy Day, also, one of those people. But someone you might also recognize, I believe, the communities I've engaged with, is Mr. Rogers. Someone who, it is a miracle, the way that he was able to articulate to children that they are safe, that they are loved, they are worthy, they're worth love, care, and affection. That is a miracle, the way he was able to translate it. I was absolutely enamored. I'm 37. I was absolutely enamored watching him as a kid. And I think many of you have kind of seen some of the remarks he made after 9/11, and being able to kind of translate this huge, massive thing that was going on in our country, terrible things, and trying to translate them to young kids. That is a gift. Desmond Tutu, someone who, amidst apartheid in South Africa, was, someone that was a leader in helping create reconciliation and do the hard work of that and have the hard conversations in a time where they were being so brutal to each other in South Africa. And his big thing, and Marianne would, should be all for this, is that we have to have these conversations if we're going to move forward. I don't know where it's going to lead. He said, I don't know where these conversations are going to lead, but we have to have them. Just a few more. Saint Dulce of the Poor was in Brazil, and I just loved this vision of someone. She was taking care of the poor, but the way that she raised money for the poor is that she would go out and play her accordion in the streets and busk. Which is awesome. Whatever she would make, she would just bring back. But she was trying to serve her fellow men and women by doing something that she loved, which is playing music. And then Thomas Merton, someone who was the kind of the hermit that ended up going out into the world, and someone I've always loved. That this is really someone who was trying to engage with the tough realities of war and violence at hand, but doing them in a way that was really entering into other types of religions and faiths, Buddhism and otherwise. Just an amazing man. And then one of my favorites, this is Dorothy Day and the Holy Family of the Streets. This is commissioned by my partner, Evie, who had worked alongside the Catholic worker movement for a long time. And I think Dorothy Day is someone, I did a first image of her with no halo, and this is the second one I did with a halo, and obviously she's being considered for canonization now, and there's a lot of people that write way more eloquently on that than I do, but she liked to say, don't call me a saint. But I think what she was saying is that, and what's really beautiful is this is work that you can all do. And welcoming the stranger and the outcast in our own communities and trying to find Jesus in our own backyards, right? So another part of that, though, is, and we can also do this in our communities, is looking at the images that we're receiving currently, and the things that are happening, and trying to create new images or center our conversation around them in a way that can also be really engaging and beautiful. And I'm sure a lot of you have seen these amazing images from the James Webb Telescope that have been coming out. And this took on new meaning for my partner and I This next image, painted, actually finished this painting last week for Advent. And it was based off of a poem that Brother Jeff McNabb, he was the director of the novitiate, Franciscan novitiate community in Santa Barbara. He shared this poem by Sister Ilia Delio the day before he died, which was on Christmas Day this past year. And this icon is inspired from this poem. And it felt like a conversation with Jeff, but also Sister Delio, but then trying to then make that kind of conversation or connection and with other people through this poem. And I'll just read it briefly. It's just so beautiful. What do the stars say? The light that meets our eyes after millions of years summons us to look beyond. The dark that hovers over us is filled with light. That underneath the appearance of the stable heavens is the bubbling energy of the universe. We are forming, and nothing can stop us. There is a palpable power of attraction pulling us towards we know not where. Love alone is the guide of the universe, and the whole universe is in the human heart. Tend to the heart, and the power of love will name itself as God. And what Sister Delia's work, I'd encourage you to look into it, but I was really talking about this idea of our new understandings of the universe, that when stars die, they become something else. They become new life, new resurrection. That the love that we experience, Brother Jeff is one of the most loving people I've ever met, and I'm sure all of you in your communities have had, sisters and brothers and others who have died, but their work lives on in you. Their love lives on in you. And I think the metaphor in the James Webb images continually remind me of that, and Brother Jeff, and of Advent and Mary. This idea that the universe was born from love, This next image is relevant now with the war continually happening, but also gun violence in this country. And after right here in St. Louis, maybe 10 miles down the road, 3 miles down the road, we had a shooting at a high school CVPA, which was horrible. And that we continue to, unfortunately, in this country, protect guns over the lives of children. And I was looking back at older images, and this was done by Otto Pankow, who, this was made in the 50s, but he made a lot of work during the 1930s in Germany, and Hitler named him a degenerate artist, and you can see why. It's very anti-war. And so I was looking at this beautiful woodcut he made of Christ breaking the rifle, and wanted to make an icon version of that, of Jesus breaking, though, not a rifle, but an AR-15, this thing that in most of our country is one of the most violent items right now in terms of lives lost in this country. This breaking that over his knee. But another, I think really the theme of the work, and wanting to talk more about this, kind of for the last little bit of time we have together, is focusing on trying to see Christ in our own neighborhoods and in the suffering and in the stranger and the outcast in our own communities. And really how looking at images that carrying all of those metaphors and symbols and the other sacred art that we have from the past, but then bringing them into the present in a way that they're made new, and that potentially we can see Christ and God in our neighbor and amongst us in new ways. This is a homeless Christ. It was painted for a priest who does homeless ministry in Chicago, which I grew up next to, and the homeless population there really suffers, specifically in the wintertime, finding shelter. This image also having to do with the least of these refugees. This image is actually another family I met when I was in Palestine. It was a refugee family living in a camp there. And the mother, knowing that she was pregnant one night, or she was pregnant, but realizing something was wrong, they realized they needed to go to a hospital, but there was a curfew during nighttime. So they secretly cut a hole in the fence, and then walked all night to get to the nearest hospital through the desert, and arrived at dawn, and she ended up giving birth to a beautiful baby girl. But these were members of that community that were advocates for nonviolence and having open communication between Palestinians and Israelis and creating more dialogue around the suffering on both sides that was happening. And they were just a beacon of hope. But again, their experience of refugees really harkens back to Mary and Joseph and Jesus during the Advent season as well. This is a statue that I saw. It's called La Pequeña, I hope I said that right, Our Lady of the Journey. This is at the St. Lima Mission in California. I just thought it came around a corner, it was there, I was like, Our Lady of the Journey. And it just got us thinking about just another least of these, that some of the most vulnerable people in the world are women and women of color who are refugees. And depicting that their journey as mothers or found mothers is a beautiful one, and that they have the image of God within them, and their lives are worth something and meaningful. In a similar way, this is La Sagra da Familia, depicting the flight of Egypt, but as Latinx immigrants walking through the desert. This is one of the first images that I painted when I was a Luddite for a while, so I didn't have anything on the internet, but this is the first thing I shared in 2016 when there was so much rhetoric about anti-stranger, anti-immigrant in this country. My partner and I were talking about, like, what can we do, or an image that would really ask us to look at the situation in a different way, that there are people fleeing violence in South America and other countries who are seeking, and unfortunately are undocumented, but coming in a way that they're seeking refuge and safety and a new life, just as Mary, Joseph, and Jesus were fleeing to Egypt 2,000 years ago. Again, carrying those metaphors into the present. In a similar way, one of the most common names for Mary in the orthodox iconography is Our Lady of the Oppressed. And this is during the time when these same people who are crossing the desert were getting put in these camps and chain link fence with mylar, and showing that they were also sacred, that they're not villains, that the church itself is really a stranger in this world, and that we should be welcoming the stranger. And this image was used in various protests and really in movements that were going on during that time. And again, I think this is another thing, that the art that we think is in our churches can actually be used to go out into the world and to enter into new ways to see God in our neighbors. Tent city nativity. Again, the classic story of the nativity, but carrying it forward. Right here in St. Louis, probably literally, you could probably look out one of these windows and see where this camp was. People were constantly being evicted and really struggling and going through no room at the inn. And again, carrying those metaphors forward. And instead of the three wise men, there's fellow people staying with her. Instead of bringing frankincense, myrrh, and gold, they have a blanket, some hot soup, and some coffee. And just a few more images I want to talk about. This was a big one for us in St. Louis. This is called Mama, and the original of this icon is actually here in St. Louis, Holy Communion Episcopal Church. In 2020, as most of us knew, when George Floyd was murdered, it shocked everybody. And in that terrible, terrible video, that the last words that he said were "Mama," like absolutely shook us. And knowing that police brutality continues to happen in our country and in probably all the communities that you're involved in, something has to change. That men of color, women of color, mothers are continually losing their sons and daughters to this type of brutality. And so my partner and I were talking to members of our community, and we were talking, just saying, what can we do so this doesn't keep happening? What kind of image could we use, or that is in our kind sacred art that we could use to really contemplate and have these hard conversations. And the image that we came up with was the Pietà, mother holding her dead son. And this image here was circulating online during that time of George Floyd's mother cradling young George when he was a toddler. Just almost that mirror image there. But originally we had the face of Mary looking at the dead body of Christ. But Evie, rightly so, she said we should change it, having it looking at the viewer and really looking at us again, saying, what are we going to do so this doesn't keep happening? And I think that's something about these images that are hard, is that we all have the image of God within us, all of us. We don't get to pick and choose, in my opinion, we don't get to pick and choose who does and doesn't have the image of God within them. But that's it. And working with artwork, I've also come to know this through various mentors. The image of God, there's something about the image of God that will always be resisted. And that there's something about the image of God that will always be crucified because we continue to crucify each other. And this image, I think, taught me that and how it was received. The pushback was crazy. In 2021, in November, this image, the prints of it were at the Catholic University of America, and it was stolen 3 separate times. And the university, unfortunately, came to the conclusion that they didn't want to have a conversation about it. It was in the media, there was a lot of coverage, there was a few statements, but ultimately a few students voted that they wanted to be removed and have more appropriate images put up. And the higher-ups in the university agreed that there shouldn't be a conversation that we have. I was really saddened by that. And talking about what Marianne was talking about earlier, it's important that are we going to be like, we're going to be with people who stand with Christ and in his suffering, or are we going to be like Peter, that instead of standing with Christ in his suffering and having the hard conversations by the fire, instead we run away and act like they don't exist, right? And so really what this did is it just showed me that how needed these kind of conversations are, these tough conversations, but that our communities and places of worship can be these places, and that some artwork that we have there can potentially create some of those dialogues and conversations. And a lot of people asked us, is it George Floyd or Jesus in that image? The best answer that we came up with is yes. It is Christ, but it is, as St. Teresa of Calcutta said, Christ in distressing disguise. That Jesus said he was to be found in those who suffer, and least of these, just as George Floyd did, so therefore it is George Floyd. That dualistic question, it's fine for the sake of conversation, but not for the sake of the truth, right? And as we kind of ponder all of this, and I think this is what the other thing that church art can do, is that just in our everyday life, we are absolutely inundated with images, advertisements. I mean, I've often said there's most of the McDonald's signs you'll see in a highway are probably taller than most church steeples in the world. It's crazy. We're inundated with them. But what happens is that the images we choose to share and worship with and contemplate with can potentially be yet another way where we enter into greater communion with each other, but also on how to see Christ in least of these within the stranger and those whom it is hard to love, maybe, or to name the ways that we hope to see God, or the way that we take care of the natural world and this planet, and seeing all of these things in our own backyards. And so it's my hope that's what these images can do. And just one last story. Image is probably going to be hard to tell what it is. That's fine, because that's kind of the point. This is an image I had started as an icon of Christ the Pantocrator. It's the classic Jesus holding a gospel book and giving the sign, right? And I was right when I first started out, like one of the first pieces I showed you, the lilies. And I was, doing it, but I got to the hands, and this is ridiculous, but I ended up calling it at first Baby Hands Jesus because I couldn't get the hands right. And I was so frustrated. But I was still learning how to paint. But I was so frustrated, I put it on a shelf. Well, 2 years later, to a friend and an artist and a priest and an artist friend of mine came in. I was working on some things, and what I had done is I had some new gold leaf, and I didn't have anything to try it out on, so I was like, oh, I didn't like this anyway, so I put it down, I hastily covered it with gold leaf. But I noticed that because I had worked the image so much, that even though from far away, and from you back there, it probably looks like that, it just looks like a plain gold leaf board, that when you actually got up to it and shifted your perspective, you could see the raised face of Christ. And I was like, oh, this is something. And so my friends came in, though, and they looked at it, and both at the same time they said, oh, that's the cloud of unknowing. And I didn't know what that was. And just briefly, for those who don't know, Cloud of Unknowing was a 14th century book written by an anonymous author. What he was really saying is that knowledge will only get us so far. But the more that we put God under a cloud of forgetting or unknowing, the closer we'll be to him through the heart. And then what that experience did is that, they saw what that was. They named it. So therefore, it had become a new gift. And that changed me. And so what are the ways that we need each other to see? Not the ways we're not loving well, the ways that maybe our mission isn't the way that aligned with how we wanted it to be in the first place, or maybe the ways that we're letting the different regulations or things that we're doing get in the way of it being in relationships with different people, what have you. And so for me, that's my challenge. And there's so many other artists and poets and musicians and ways that we can use our artwork, and people willing to enter into this conversations other than me. There's the work of icons too, Mark Dukes. This is Our Lady of Ferguson and all those affected by gun violence. This beautiful Lion of Judah, it's called A Face of Christ. And then Brother Robert Lenz, who is a Franciscan friar who made so many beautiful images. The people that are willing to enter into these conversations about using diverse images and more representative images, for our communities and how we see God in our neighbors, in each other, and around us in new ways. Thank you so much for having me here today. I hope that this will begin to kind of be able to look at the images that you have in your spaces and in your own communities. Maybe there's some things there that are around the corner that could really be used again to create better conversations. Or what are new images or new ways that you can have these conversations? There's Visio Divina, which is a way of contemplating together on artwork, as many of you know of. I'll be here all day. I just thank you. I'd love to have conversations with any of you as it comes up. Thank you so much for having me here, and I hope you have a lovely rest of the day.